Okay. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all from wherever you are joining us today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first technical session of our SP Port Harcourt section, Petroleum Engineering Industry Experience Bootcamp. This is a series of five technical sessions, which we will be organizing every Monday that will cover the key disciplines as part of this bootcamp, namely production geology and geophysics, petrophysics, reservoir engineering, production technology, and finally, petroleum economics. My name is Gerald Ihedilonye. I am a production engineer and asset lead at Enquest PLC, and also the organizing committee lead for this bootcamp. And it is my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. For today's session, we will be starting with the first of the five technical lecture series. This week, we have production geology and geophysics, a very important and fundamental part, of the offstream oil and gas business, and one which is not so common to the petroleum engineers. So it will be a very interesting presentation and an interesting session for us here today. And of course, we have a very wonderful guest, an expert who will be delivering a presentation on this discipline today, introducing us to the fundamental concepts, the discipline workflows, the data and outputs, and also how the generated insights from this discipline are integrated with other disciplines towards maturing production opportunities. On that note, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. His name is Dr. David Anamnese. He's a senior production geologist at Seplat Energy PLC. He had his bachelor's degree in geological science, a master's degree in applied geophysics, and a doctorate degree in petroleum geology. He has an MBA from QSPT and an executive education from INSEAD Business School. He is a recipient of various scholarships for his academic programs, and he was the NAPE Nigerian Young Professionals Lead from 2017 to 2018. He started his career as a graduate intern geologist in Shell Petroleum Development Company, after which he worked for Nubian Group Nigeria Limited, Erin Energy, Laser Engineering and Resources Consultants Limited, as well as for Monipulo, a petroleum development company, as a senior geologist. He has worked in exploration, development, production, well operations, and WRFM teams. He's a recipient of the 2015 Best Geology Paper Presenter at the Society of Exploration Geophysicists IGSC conference in Prague, Czech Republic. He's also a recipient of various reputable industry awards, including the Outstanding Young Geoscientist of the Decade and Industry Future Sustainability Award. He's a member of NAPE, AAPG, SEG, EAGE, SPE, and NGA. Such a very fantastic bio. So you see the wealth of experience he brings. I see some of us are already clapping in the chat. Please, let's keep clapping as I make welcome Dr. David Anamnese to deliver his presentation for us today. Dr. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Hello,
please.
everyone, and good evening. Yeah, I'll try to share my screen, and I hope we'll all follow through from there. Okay, confirm once you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it now. Maybe you can put it in a slideshow mode.
Yeah. All right. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. I think it's an honor to actually be here today to present to graduates, young professionals, early career professionals, and perhaps also professionals in the industry. I learned about the post camp earlier in the month, and by the time I got the call for this, I felt well. I always look forward to adding value to the industry, especially in terms of providing knowledge around the subsurface system, which I'm very good at. So today I'll be looking at production geology and geophysics. I know a lot of us have heard about production geology and geophysics, different industry folks. But more importantly, what I would say is there's nothing so I mean, there's nothing so rocket science about it, science. And also about geology. Geology is like an art. So it's an art that geologists find tools to understand the art of geology. That's what we do basically in geology. In the geology we're doing is trying to, sediments that exist for a very long time, over 100 years, thousands of years. In the present time, you are making a prediction and saying it could be this, then all these sediments were created from place, or the quality could have been poorer or it could have been better on this other side. We use, all the data we have to actually begin to make predictions. And that is what basically geologists and the geophysics guys actually do. They use the available data, the subsurface to make predictions of where are the potential places where we have hydrocarbon in the subsurface. And that is why they call it production geologists. So you see, anytime you hear someone described as a production geologist or a production geophysicist, who expects is actually doing two things: reservoir description and reservoir operations. Description is about to describe the reservoir, how the reservoir came up. If it's in the geophysics part, you want to look at the seismic. Are there some interesting pictures from your AVO, inversion, and the rest? If it's on the geology side, you're looking at the sedimentology. How are your sediments being deposited? Are you dealing with the surface sand? Are you dealing with the channel sand, a barrier bar, or whichever one? Then we now move on to the well operations. Well operations, you're looking at, oh, I've seen my opportunity, I've seen the reservoir that I'm looking out for, and I've actually identified where I think the reservoir properties are good and all of that. The question now goes to how do I execute it? Now begins to look at the wells. How do I drill a new well if I have to drill a new well? If I have to make use of existing well, the question now becomes, with that existing well, how am I able to, utilize it to derive the maximum value from few wells? For instance, if I have like 5, 10 reservoirs, how do I drill the fewest number of wells, to maximally develop those 5 to 10 reservoirs? It's not just drilling so many wells, but the fewer number of wells that are economically justifiable. Then in some cases, it might not even require to drill a well. It might just require for you to go and do an intervention activity, maybe a reperforation, and you still get your hydrocarbon. So whichever way, it's a production geology or geophysics, you look at all of the items in terms of the subsurface data and make your decision of what to do. So today, I'll be taking us through a number. There are so many things in production geology. I've just tried to summarize this into about 18 to 20 slides. So what we'll do today is we'll be looking at it based on what are the most important data to look out for. And also, aside from the most important data to look out for, you're also looking at what data could actually give you some value about what to look out for, because you can have your data, but you don't know what to look out for. That's also another situation. So we're looking at all of this and also looking at case examples of where some mistakes have been made, where some success have been made, where if you're going to make a decision, where would you actually, place your wells, or where would you like to go ahead and do a reperforation? All of those decisions are what we're actually going to be looking at today. So in the subsurface discipline, in geology, we're always looking at the regional geology. Here is looking at the gross depositional environment and where you are currently in the delta. You need to understand where you are as a subsurface person. You don't just take up a field and begin to look for, oh, well, let us go and punch a well here. Let's go here, look at this map. It's not just enough. You need to know, okay, based on where I am in the delta at the moment, what is the possibility that I will find hydrocarbon within this sequence? He also looking at it in terms of historical data. I'll give you a simple analogy is when you come to the Niger Delta, if someone tells you, oh, you're going to find hydrocarbon in about 1,000 feet of drill, you already know that the chances of getting that is very slim. But if someone tells you, based on what we have, the Epoch field is the shallowest field that has been drained in the Niger Delta, and it was drilled to about 3,000 feet. So if someone gives you a correlation that is similar to the Epoch field, and you get to see similar data, shales that are really usually continuous, you can begin to pick that information and say, oh, this is likely, hydrocarbon. However, in the hydrocarbon you find shallower depths like this, could they also mean that they are more viscous than the usual light oil that you deal with? So it might just be heavy oil that you find within those shallow depths. So it's good to always have a good understanding about where you are in the Niger Delta, and also that will also help you guide what kind of deposition setting. Another example is if you're in the offshore environment, in the deep offshore environment, you're dealing with turbidite channels. Many of your sands are not like your sheet sands, so your sands are not continuous. You could really well just move 1 kilometer or 500 meters or 200 meters away, you find yourself inside shale. You're very cautious of such. But when it comes to the onshore environment, dominantly maybe the northern delta double belt, you're dealing with completely sheet sand. Majority of those sands are very continuous. So there are chances that, well, you do really well here, you go to, over 1 kilometer, you still find that sand, except that sand has been cut off by a shale, by a clay field channel, kind of. So those are some of the things that you need to first understand in terms of geology, where you are in terms of the depositional environment and what are the stratigraphic settings of where you're dealing with. Then the other bit also to look at also is, you don't look at the trapping style. In the Niger Delta, for instance, if you're in the onshore environment, you're looking at your normal growth fault. But when you go to the deep offshore environment, you're looking at reverse toe thrust. So it's also good to have an idea about how some of these concepts actually work. So before we even go into more detail, it's also good to look at all the different play concepts in the entire Niger Delta. So there are locations where you expect to find your hydrocarbon. If you're in the onshore, you're in the offshore, these are more or less like the expected play concept: four-way closure, three-way closure, footwall closure, or hanging wall closures. Then as you go more into the deep offshore environment, you begin to see a lot of pinch out and turbidite channels, that have been, and also inside the valley field. So a lot of these things are things you need to have in terms of understanding the general overview of what the sedimentation looks like in the Niger Delta. So it makes you understand where I am in the Niger Delta can guide the opportunity I'm actually looking out for. Now we'll go more into the meat of the day. If you're looking at as a geologist or as a geophysicist, you're trying to look out for opportunity. That's basically what you're looking out for as a production geologist. Anytime you sit on your desk, you're looking at, okay, what are the opportunities remaining I need to harness? And for you to harness all of these opportunities or bring them to bear, there are a number of data you need to consider. One of such data is pressure. There are no other, but one of such is pressure. Now, the pressure of your data of your reservoirs can actually help you understand if your reservoir, you're dealing with initial pressure or, at a late life pressure as a depleted pressure. If you're dealing with initial pressure, definitely you know that you have enough energy to actually get your hydrocarbon to the surface and also down to the facility. But if your pressure having depleted, in some cases, it might require you to either get a compressor, or rather, it might also require you to get like a gas lift. If your oil is not very light, you don't have enough solution gas. So a number of things are factors that you have to consider, the pressures. Then in some other case, you're looking at the volumes too. If you're going to identify an opportunity and your volume, let me say your volume is just let me say 10,000 barrels of oil in place, not 10 million barrels, but 10,000 barrels. You already know, well, that can't actually do anything for you. You can even do a simple calculator, just press 10,000 barrels times $50 in your calculator. No activity. That opportunity is like no activity because it's never going to pass in economics. So you need to also be cautious of what the volume is. That's the volume that will guide you. But if you have like a 5 million barrels of oil, then begin to say, oh, yeah, there's an opportunity here that we need to go ahead and look for ways to harness it. The next question comes, even under the volumes, you want to look at for developed oil and gas. What I mean developed oil and gas is if I have like 5 reservoirs and I already have wells producing from those 5 reservoirs, I need to be careful before going ahead to put another well into those reservoirs. A number of factors has to be now be considered. The question now becomes, where could it be that there is an Arctic oil or a bypass oil or a bypass gas or an Arctic gas that has not been drained, that what I'm doing at the moment is going to help me get that bypass hydrocarbon to develop it. And that's the reason that require me to do maybe a reperforation or drill a new well. Otherwise, if I've developed all the wells I see there, can actually develop my hydrocarbon effectively and get me my hydrocarbon to the surface on the near term, then there's no need for additional activity. You just work on monitoring, and that's where the focus will then remain. The other bit also is looking at the total produced oil. We'll look at samples of this as we progress, but just give a brief highlight. Total produced oil, total produced gas, total produced associated gas. Sometimes, you have people telling you, okay, we see there is a localized pool of oil here. I've actually done, or I drilled through a well there, or I did a CO log, a saturation log, and I'm seeing oil or gas. You need to now go back, even if you've seen that on the log, you need to go back and check what's the total production from that tank as compared to the initial production. For instance, if I have a tank that is 50 million barrels and I've produced about 40 million barrels, that shows that there is something questionable there. It's either my tank has not been well calculated or my reservoir properties have not been properly calculated, because you wouldn't expect to have oil to go give you a recovery factor as much as 80%. But if it is gas, you can say, yeah, in some cases you have some good gas volumes that pushes your recovery factors to as high as 80%. But for oil, that doesn't exist. So if you get that number in the oil, you now need to be careful before you go and add an additional well. Because first of all, you're not dealing with the accurate numbers. But if at the end of the day, for instance, another instance is I calculate my total number of oil from having 50 million barrels initial. Then I check what have been produced. I've produced just 10 million barrels. I still have 40 million barrels in there. So what I've just done is that I've only produced about 20% of the oil opportunity. The question now is, if my other well is already dying off gradually, it shows that there are opportunities within that reservoir that I can still harness. Meaning that the existing well have not been able to totally drain the entire oil that could have been recovered from that reservoir due to the limitations in the drainage radius of that well. So the drainage radius also play a role. I'll show us that in samples, and we'll see how some of these things actually play. The other bit also is in the GOR. Imagine there are situations where you go in there, even the solution gas, and my interest, for instance, is I want to go and produce oil. And you realize that even the existing wells have already been producing with high GOR. So there are chances that your oil is already getting so small that it might not become economical for you to produce as oil. Rather, you might want to decide to go in to produce the gas and just focus on developing the gas, strip the remaining oil from it. So all of these have their own impact. Then I highlighted in yellow here current production. Now, why I highlighted current production is if you're a production geologist or geophysicist, you need to ensure and be sure that whatever opportunity you're finding, that you don't have an existing drainage radius, existing draining well within that opportunity. Otherwise, that if I have a well currently producing from there, why do I want to see that as an opportunity? That's no opportunity. That's an NFA. I do not need an activity for me to actually develop that resources. Meaning the existing well is going to help me develop that resources based on the drainage radius. So all of that also is some of the things that you consider: the Arctic oil, the bypass oil. Then we'll look at the structural maps, also the maps. So the maps is you're looking at the structures and you're saying, based on the maps I have today, is it possible that there could be a structural high and we've not tested that structural high somewhere around the reservoir? Or could it be possible that, there are Arctic oil or Arctic gas opportunities that we've not drained that will need to drain? Or could it be possible that the seismic interpretation that was done previously was not properly done, and now you've reinterpreted and you're seeing a better structure that seems quite realistic? So some of these things are, things you need to consider. Then we'll have the logs. The logs are also very important. You want to know what the reservoir and fluid properties are. You want to look at the saturation log. For reservoir, for brown fields, you're always looking at saturation log because you want to carry out a case-hole logging and see, based on this log, are there still opportunities within this reservoir? If there are no opportunities, then there might not be need for you to go ahead and start spending millions of dollars really well, or sending thousands of dollars to do an intervention activity. The same thing goes to the viscosity. The viscosity also drives the development approach for the reservoir. So for light oil reservoirs, yeah, they are easy to develop. But for heavier oil, then you need to be careful of how you want to develop them. Are you using a gas lift, ESP, or do you want to use some, enhanced oil recovery techniques to actually develop them? All of these things are things that you have to check. But for the geology and geophysics, among all of this, the critical ones that the geology and geophysics guys usually work on is the volumes of the hydrocarbon, identifying that volume, tying it to production, and also the maps. That's the critical one. That's why I put them in a highlighted dotted line box. Those are the critical ones. The log interpretation will definitely be done by the petrophysicists. Same thing with the reservoir engineers working on the viscosity and the pressures. But whichever one it is, they have to feed into your data. But you should also have a good idea, a good knowledge of interpretation. Because if you're a geologist and you cannot interpret basic logs, that's a problem. So you need to also have a good idea of how to interpret those basics of logs and also interpret your pressures to identify, if your pressures are actually showing significant depletion or initial pressures. So we also look at the recovery methods. There are a number of recovery methods available. The three major ones are the primary oil recovery, secondary, and the enhanced oil recovery method. So if we look at the primary and the secondary, they are more for the light oil. While for the enhanced oil recovery, they are more towards the heavier or the more viscous fluid. So in the primary recovery, you realize that what you're just basically doing is water drive, gas drive, solution gas, and all of that. Then when you go to secondary, you're trying to see if you can do some injection of water or oil to maintain pressure or to help with the sweep. Then you have the enhanced oil recovery. For the heavy oil reservoirs that cannot naturally be produced by ESP or gas lifts, you now want to consider what additional technique. Will we go ahead and use a chemical method, SAGD, thermal method, and the rest of them? So those are all the things that we have to consider. Then, the drive mechanisms also have their own impact. For instance, in terms of impact, if you look at the water drive mechanism, you can see if your aquifer is very strong, you see how much of recovery you get. If you have a strong gas cap drive, you see also recovery. Then the solution gas cap drive also has its own minimal impact, which helps in the drive of the oil. Then another question that comes to mind is, I'm looking out for an opportunity, but I need to look out for some critical stuff within the subsurface. The first question that comes to mind is there a confirmed hydrocarbon, type that aligns to business needs? I'll give you a simple example. You have a case where you have a gas field, and you all know there's a gas field there. You don't just go ahead and start saying, oh, there's a gas field here, let's go ahead, drill a well, and, clock it. You need to first look at the business case. Do you have a gas market available? Or do you have any gas line around you that you can tie your gas to before you can go ahead to develop gas? If it is for oil, we know many times you can either trunk it or you do a pipeline, depending on the closest flow station to you, or if you have a flow station, you could actually tie to it. But you need to ensure that you have a plan to actually cut your hydrocarbon, your resources into the market. So that's why, in as much as you're trying to mature an opportunity, be sure that the business needs also align. Don't mature an opportunity that at the end of the day, the business needs won't actually meet up. Except you just want to mature it and keep it in the basket. Yeah, some of those things also happen or for reserve booking. But as much as possible, if you are maturing an opportunity that you want to quickly progress into execution, then you need to ensure that it also aligns to your business needs. The other question that comes to, for instance, if you look at the figure on the right, I have this figure and I have a well there. You're beginning to ask yourself, are there Arctic oil and gas opportunities? Arctic means above the current perforations, crestal to the existing well. So if you look at it, you have well here and you have the crestal well, crestal position of the structure. Could that be possible that there is oil or gas in this place? Which could mean if, for instance, this is oil and down here we'll have, this is oil and down here we have oil. What that means is that you have an Arctic oil that cannot be drained, and you might need an additional well at this crest to actually help you drain those oil, because where you position your initial well might be down the structure. But if this actually turns out to be gas, if your interpretation of this log turns out to be gas, the question is, you already have oil on top of gas. In fact, it doesn't exist based on mobility, based on, capillary pressure. So you always have your gas on top of oil. So if this is gas, the question is above the gas, is there any other thing that could have there? It will definitely always be gas. except now that area is shelled out. That's where the depositional environment also mattered. If I have a shale filled channel at the top of the crest of my structure, that means there are no much opportunities there. So in as much as I might have that attic, structure and all of that, you might go there and there won't be any value addition to the business. So we need to always tie all of this to the positional environment and do some additional work on the environment to identify if indeed that opportunity exists. Then the question also is, what's the current pressure of the reservoir? So if this reservoir, for instance, let me say the first reservoir at the very top, if the reservoir is depleted, that means I have this reservoir currently depleted in terms of the pressure. And I still have this reservoir producing at the moment. I wouldn't go at the crest to put a well there, except my intention is actually to kill this well. Otherwise, what happens is that you deplete the pressure that this well is supposed to use initially to actually develop the resources from its own, within its own drainage radius. So as much as that, there are a number of things that has to be considered for you to accurately model how much you can recover from a reservoir. Then the other piece also is you want to look at the shrinking or the expanding of the gas. Sometimes you have your gas shrinking if your aquifer, especially if your aquifer drive is high, and you also have it expanding if your gas drive is actually higher. So in whichever way, depending on where the energy is, you need to have an understanding of where the preferential sweep direction is. That would also help to guide where you place your well. For instance, if my aquifer is actually very strong, if I have a very strong aquifer, I wouldn't go and place a well close to the aquifer contact. The chances are by the time the aquifer, starts coming, before you know it, within a short while, the well is watered out. So as much as possible, I want to move my well away from the contact or away from, depending on if it is an edge water drive or not. I want to move away as much as possible from the contact. So some of these things are the contributing factors you look out for, whether your drive is actually coming from your active drive is the water, the aquifer, or the gas cap. Then you need to also check for potential for fault reactivation or across fault communication. So, sometimes you hear about a fault. I'll give you an example. If you look towards this part of the structure, you realize there's a minor fault here that is just behind the well. So if at the end of the day, this fault initially was sealing, and over 5 to 10 years, there now seem to be some reactivation of that fault, and they now have like a vertical, open connection on that fault. What that means is that my hydrocarbon from the lower limits will actually be getting into the upper limits, upper reservoirs. And in some cases, you now begin having cross communication of the pressures as well. So you might go there and try to put in a new well without properly understanding the pressures there, and you get there and realize that you have a very high pressure, similar to one of the kick events we had in the Chevron case that happened a few years ago. So it's something to be actually very careful of how you manage fault reactivation. Then as we go ahead also, one of the things to look out for is the depositional environment. This is where the geophysics also play key roles. And in the depositional environment, you've defined the depositional environment is a channel sand cutting through a shore face or a channel cutting each other. Then you begin to look at, indeed, if for instance I've calculated my volume, imagine if this structure we see on the right, the black line is a complete structural map. And initially I've calculated my volume to be all the way to where you have the contact dotted line. And that's my belief. And I'm now thinking, oh, if I have well 1, well 16, I think it would be good for me to go to the middle and just pointing a well there to develop that particular axis based on the drainage radius. Without going into detail to look at the seismic signature, you realize that you might not actually get what you want by the time you get to execute the well. Why? Because by the time you get there, what we realize is that within this area, you have the amplitude of the seismic relatively poorer than what you have in the adjacent on the left and on the right side of it, showing that there's chances of a clay field channel. Now, when you have that clay field channel, it means that whatever that is produced on well 16 and on well 1 would not have any communication. So inadvertently, if you take a pressure data from well 1 and a well 16, you realize that the pressure data within the two areas are totally different. And there are also situations on the seismic where you actually reprocess your seismic and you begin to see some false structural highs. So in some cases, it's also advisable, look at if, for instance, you're seeing a structural high, you want to plan a well or plan an STOG and STG activity on that opportunity. go back to the legacy seismic and look at that seismic and indeed check, does that structural high you're seeing on this reprocessed seismic really, is it really found in the legacy seismic, or due to velocity from the seismic you're processing, we've actually, created a pull up on the structure. So some of these have to really be considered in understanding how your hydrocarbon, flow would actually move based on where you're identifying your opportunity. Here is also another case study. So here is a paper we had in SPE last year, and you can always check the paper out online. And more interesting thing about this is if you look at this map and look at the stick diagram, we realize on the map is a fluid distribution map showing oil. The red is oil, the green is gas. Then what we realize is, so we have a number of wells that have been produced from this reservoir, and I call them the drainage wells. So the drainage wells means these wells have actually been drilled and they've produced. They've watered out. They're almost gone. The question now is, based on all of this, where is the remaining opportunity? Now, I went on to acquire some CO log and all of that. And by the time you acquire CO log, it showed that towards the crest of the structure, instead of you having a gas, you're having an indication of potential for oil, showing that there's possibilities that this gas had shrinked. The gas had shrink, your aquifer energy was reactivated. And with that, if you look at the end of history, by the time we carry out a simulation and try to, calibrate with the available data, we realize that the significant shrinkage of the gas, and you have this bypass oil that is located towards the crest and northeastern part of the structure. So the question now is, if I look at all of this, where do I put my next well, or where do I put my next opportunity? Or which well would I want to go and reperforate on? So those are the questions that now comes to mind as a geologist or as a geophysicist. And the question is, the opportunity we've done there, we'll try to make it easy. The A and B is most likely going to be your potential locations where you're going to put your next well. Why? By the time you look at your end of history, it's already telling you that that's where you have your remaining opportunity. So if I have to put any well, then it has to be towards that direction. But the second question now is, based on me putting on this A and B, if I were to be in your position as a team or as a member of this presentation, let me assume that we are all members of an asset team. Which well would you put forward as highly ranked to develop this remaining opportunity? So I don't know, maybe someone can answer maybe in the chat box, if it is A or B, which would you prefer to put forward for development? Am I seeing the chat? Can they access the chat box?
Yes, they can.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm dropping their comments.
Okay.
So we have 3 people have said B so far. 4 people B, 2 people A so far.
Okay. So I'm seeing more of B.
Yeah, more of B.
A.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting enough. The B's, I'm so sorry, but I think the A's have it. So realistically, what happens is that anytime you have a resaturation concept, it's called the principle of diasteresis. Hysteresis. It affects your relative permeability, and you realize that your relative permeability is also reduced as compared to the initial permeability of the reservoir. So what that means is that you have lower permeability and also impact on hydrocarbon. So if I come towards the crest of my structure, I would expect A to perform better than what B would actually perform. And we've tested that and it's actually the result of it. So the reason is the A is more crestal in terms of structure and is farther away from the aquifer as compared to B. Why do I say so? If you look at B, you have a well here already that has produced and watered out, just on the right of B. What that means is that if I have an aquifer coming from the eastern direction, the chances are high that the aquifer will have significant impact on B. And over time, I'll be having more influx of water on B than as compared to A, where I'm actually being positioned relatively in a more central position of the structure. And I'm also more crestal. Another thing to also look out for is anytime if you look at the stick diagram, anytime you're having down to, when I mean you're down to in opportunities, that means you're having oil down to or gas down to or whatever, you realize that the sweep, the chances that your water will get in will lesser than when you're having a contact. So if I come towards this axis and I put a well here where I have a contact, I will have higher water impact than where I come towards the crest where I do not have, contact. So a down to the structure would always give you, more recovery than where you have put a well close to where you have a contact. So the ideal selection should be A. You go more crestal to position your well, and you also look at the drainage radius of the closest well. So if I look at this well, I assume this well is going to take about 300 meters or 400 meters, depending. I assume this other one is going to take 300, 300, 300. Then when you look at this one, you can already tell. By the time I do a circumference around here, you realize that one way or the other, this well would affect B. So I wouldn't want to go to B as a priority as compared to A. Okay, so we'll move to the next. To go to the depositional environment, I also like to draw people's attention to how important the depositional environment is, especially in terms of new opportunities or STOG, STDG. So I also want to ask another question here. If we look at this log motif, look at this log motifs. These are different log motifs for different environments. If I take the very one on the left, that's a surface sand. That's A is a surface sand, B is a channel sand, and C is a channel sand. Now, based on the log motif you're seeing, which of these reservoirs will yield a uniform sweep for gas? So please use the chat box as well. Which of them will yield a uniform sweep for gas? Am I able to clear the chat? So just select between A, B, C, which would yield a uniform yield.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Uniform sweep.
the response is B and C. Most people are going for C.
For gas. Okay. Responses are B's and C's, B's and C's. This is interesting. Anyway, I think that's the reason why this course is necessary for you. So the reality of it is that A is the right answer. A is the right answer. Why do I say A? In surface sands are like sheet sands. They are always very continuous. It's just like when you go to the beach. A beach is an example of a surface sand. You see the way the sands are in the beach. The sands are always continuous, and that's what you see in the beach. So what that means is that if I'm dealing with a beach sand, I will likely get a uniform sweep. My gas will just be moving into the well bore, and I'll be getting my production without more challenge. But if I go to my B or my C in channel, the thing about channel is that you can have one channel connecting into other channels. And if you look at all these shales that you're seeing, all these baffles in channels especially, some of them are quite extensive, some of them are localized, and in some ways they form some form of baffles and barriers to fluid flow. So in that case, you don't have a complete uniform sweep of the hydrocarbon. So for you to get a uniform sweep for gas, the chances are once you're in a short phase environment, you're actually going to get a uniform sweep for gas. So now we'll go to the next one. So now we're going to oil this time around. Which of these environments will yield a uniform sweep for oil? Now I've left gas, we're dealing with oil. So please, we need responses on the chat box as well. Uniform sweep for oil. Okay, I think I see BBBB. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The answer is still A. So why I said so is I made an example of a sheet sand. I said if you go to the beach and you see sand that is just continuous, one particular depositional setting, if I fill it with hydrocarbon, what does that tell me? My hydrocarbon will just be moving freely. So whether it is oil or gas, a surface sand, a sheet sand will actually help me to drain my hydrocarbon uniformly. And that is why in many cases you always have a rare chances of finding bypass oil in the surface sand, because all your oil you just put a few wells there. The two will start producing it as quickly as possible without a headache. The same thing with your gas. Once you just put in a well there, it begins to drain it. In fact, the shocking thing about it is, if, for instance, you come to a surface sand, and let me assume this yellow line is your contact. This yellow line is your contact, and below the yellow line, you have your oil, and above the yellow line, you have your gas. If I perforate only the oil, which is below the yellow line, I bet you in a surface environment, the gas above it over time, in the initial condition, the oil might be coming. Over time, the gas above it will begin to find its way into that well. And by the time you go back there, you might even do a CO log and it will tell you that there is an opportunity on the crest. But when you go there to develop it, you won't find anything, because what? Surface sands helps you to drain all your reservoirs as quickly as possible. Now, where you look at the B's and the C, you see all these baffles and shells in between, they will always serve as trap, as local trap. They will trap your oil. So you can produce oil in location A, go to location B in the same reservoir. That oil has not moved. So you might need to put in another well in that location B for you to effectively drain that location B. The same thing applies to gas. So as much as possible, when you're dealing with a channel environment, you need to look out for positions of areas where you have channelized sands and where you have an opportunity for bypass or hydrocarbon. And that is why when you look at what happens in the turbidite settings, where we do more of the 4D acquisition, seismic acquisition, do you know what we see there? There are more of channels, turbidites. Because in those channels, you don't have uniform sweep. The channels are actually just moving in one direction. I mean, you have them channels are cutting through each other. So in some parts of the channels, you can have hydrocarbon. In some other parts, you will not have hydrocarbon. In some other cases itself, you'll see two different channels having two different pressure regimes. There are examples in this slide, which I will show us, two different pressure regimes. So making you understand that those two channels are not connected. So if you have to develop them, you need to develop them separately. So those are some things to look out for. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is a typical example of how you could actually integrate your pressure into your data. So when you look at this, on the chart, on the graph is a pressure data, and this paper is from Amadi and Oido. I think I saw them, the paper very useful. So if you look at the pressure plots, you realize where you have the brown plots, that shows higher pressures than where you have all the other points, the purple, the green, the like color, light red or whatever color. You realize that they are all within 5 psi. But where you have the brown, on your seismic, you look at the location where those wells are, you realize that the brown is actually on the eastern part of the structure as compared to the others, which are on the west. Now, what that gives an inference is that if you look in between that red, you see a brown, a more or less like what a brown, a yellow line that runs all the way from the north to the east. That line gives us an indication that you're likely having a barrier that is separating the eastern channel from the western channel. And if you're going to plan a well, you do not plan a well to cross these two channels. You have to plan it such that you maintain it within one channel as is. And that's what we've done here in this plan. So we've planned this well from the surface. I will try to maintain it just within this channel axis. We don't want to cross this. Once you cross this channel, there are chances that you might actually be going into the higher pressure reservoirs. So you rather go with a different well to actually do this. And the number of operations risks that are associated with this. Now, if you cross this reservoir, one of the operational risks you're going to have is differential sticking. You can run your horizontal completions, and at the end of the day, it's going to get stuck in there due to differential sticking, and you won't be able to develop that reservoir. So it's very good to understand the operational risk in as much as you're seeing opportunities. Look at the operational risk and how you want to address all the opportunities you see. So this is also another example of a paper done by Kolade, which is also very interesting. So if we look at this correlation here, you can imagine a simple correlation, lithostratigraphic correlation. One might just assume all of this to be a sand. But by further look, you realize that you have an incised valley that is what? That is filled with the channel sand, cutting through a surface environment and also a tidal environment. So you're having almost like a three environment within a sand package. Now, what that tells you is that if I go to the surface environment to put a well there are chances that what? The well I put there will not be communicating with the incised valley field wells, where you have this reservoir. Same thing with the tidal. And if you look on the right, they'll try to now subdivide it into compartments. So you have compartment 1, compartment 2, compartment 3. And what that does for you is that it helps you, if you're developing these reservoirs, you need to develop them independently, plan their separate wells to actually harness all the oil in each of these reservoir segments. Because from what you can see, the depositional setting is not just a single depositional setting all the way. It's varying. And that's why you need to understand the impact of all of this. So as a geologist, it's also your calling to be able to separate one environment from the other and actually know how to actually place those wells for it to reward. So if you even go further, you can see what is also happening in even if you realize that you does not even continue to the next well. What that tells you is that if I go above that minor shale and put a well to produce, whatever I have on the west will not be developed as well, will not be drained. I will need a separate drainage to actually drain that part. So these are some of the things you have to consider as a geologist to effectively harness all the wells, all the resources in the field. Then we also have the case of looking at idle wells. And the reason for idle wells is it comes to the Niger Delta, comes to the globally, in any country, whatever basin you are. A number of wells have been drilled all around the places. The question now is those wells, some of them are actually idle. Some have finished producing their lifetime and they're idle. What do? Do you just keep leaving them or abandon them? Sometimes you can actually reuse some of them for intervention activity, reperforation, and zone change. And the question comes, if you look at all of these series of this is a cross section, simple cross section, that just shows. I'm trying to highlight here the idle wells. So if you look at the idle wells, they're in black. Idle perforations, while the current perforations are producing are in white. Now I ask a question. I have D4000 reservoir, D5 and E6. Use D4, D5 and E6. If we were to produce these three reservoirs, D4, so if you look at D4, D5, you can see there's no perforation on them. You can see where all your perforations are. You can see that. So now in E6, you've identified as a bypass hydrocarbon in E6. A bypass hydrocarbon, and you need to go and develop it in E6. In D4, D5, there's also hydrocarbon there, but that's not been developed. How do you do that? The thing you look out for is for the wells that are idle. I can go ahead and use some of them to do what? To reperforate. And I put the answer here. I can plan a reperforation on well B. So I see well B here. These wells are no longer producing this drainage areas. I can go up here and perforate using the well B, short string and long string. I'll put the short string on D4, put the long string on D5. And with that, I'll be able to drain those two reservoirs without drilling any new well. Then I go to E6. If I come to the E6, on this other deeper reservoir here, which is like E9, is already stopped producing. So I can take that long string, go take it shallower and reperforate here on E6. And I'll be able to produce that bypass hydrocarbon. So those are some of the things you have to do as a production geologist, using existing well to redevelop, existing opportunities or attic or bypass opportunities from the field. Then another thing to look out for is intra-reservoir shale. A number of people, you notice shales from your logs and all of that. Continuity of that shale. Shale has significant impact. This is a simple example. So if you look on the left, you have this figure that shows someone trying to plan a well into this reservoir. Now you want to plan an oil well into a reservoir that has a gas cap. And within that reservoir, you realize there's a shale that is very continuous. Now, if you plan your well this way, before your production, look at what is going to happen after production. Because usually your gas, if your gas is not shrinking, what will happen? It will be expanding. Now, if your gas expands, there are chances that this gas might come in here and it will kill this well. And the easiest way to kill any well is when any unexpected fluid enters the heel of the well, not even the toe. If the gas is coming from the toe, there might not be any problem. But if it is coming from the heel, that's where the problem is. You realize that once gas finds its way here, the well will gas out. And it will prevent much of this oil from getting into the drainage. So you also want to work out a way when you're planning your wells. How do I effectively plan this well? If this reservoir was just an oil reservoir alone without a gas cap, yeah, you can say, okay, this will pass. You can go ahead and do it this way, plan your well. But if it is a well with a gas cap, the recommended approach is what you're seeing on the right. You go in from the gas cap, go down, get into the oil fully, then notch downwards. What you're doing is, no matter how far the gas tries to expand, it will take a while before it gets to the toe of the well. And even when it gets to the toe of the well, it will even help to support your drive in producing the oil from the heel. So you wouldn't have much impact in the well, in the gas coming in to surge your well. Then a number of other things also considered uncertainty. Uncertainty is important because no one is down there. The subsurface, 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, you're just making use of your available data to actually make all the predictions. But you also want to be sure that the predictions you're making has little or lesser uncertainty. And that's why we always have uncertainty range and the best case. So as much as possible, you want to plan your opportunities or plan your wells or harness opportunities based on the best case scenario. And that will give you much value than just going, blindly into where you have a significant uncertainty. And as much as possible, we need to understand that in the business, in the industry, we are here as a businessman or as a business company to make business, to make money. So as much as possible, you don't want to go in there and just begin to drain holes because you're saying you want to drain holes to address uncertainty. You need to ensure that the primary objective is for you to meet business objectives before you begin to add uncertainty, especially except for case where you want to do exploration. But for development purpose, which is where the production, geology, geophysics focus on, the primary goal of putting in a well or developing an opportunity is for business purpose. The business purpose also, looking at it in terms of this uncertainty also goes further, looking at the volumes. You want to also look at the volumes. If my volume is small, I've run all these, and I say the best case volume I'm getting is just one tiny volume. I'm just using also the same 10,000 barrels or 1,000 barrels. It's of no use for me wasting my time going ahead to develop that opportunity. I just have to keep it. And maybe if there's a data tomorrow that comes in and supports the chances that you have a bigger pool, then you can go ahead and reevaluate what you've done initially. Then also look at high pressures. You want to also ensure that if you're going through your well, you're drilling your well, you're going through high pressure regime, you've actually done, a good pore pressure prediction and mud weight calculation that will help you to effectively drain through those areas. Otherwise, it becomes a bit challenging for you to drill through high pressure areas. The same thing with the structure. If you're going to land a horizontal well, you need to check what are the uncertain areas. In many cases, it's advisable to drill a pilot well before you go into horizontal wells, except where you have significant well control. Then in that case, you might not necessarily want to drill a pilot well. You can just go, but the well control, the well has to be also closed. We're talking about 50 meters, 30 meters, 100 meters closed wells. Those can give you control. But if your well is 1,000 meters away from where your primary target is supposed to be, please plan your pilots well. Another thing the geologists look at is, or the geophysicists look at in shallow hazards is a shallow hazards. Because you want to drill a well that at the end of the day, you end up not drilling a well. There have been cases of blowout and all of that by people drilling into shallow hazard. So many times you look out for, if it's on the deep offshore environment or the shallow offshore, look out for pock marks on the seabed. The pock marks, the fractures or faults on the seabed. You don't go ahead and put a well in such locations. There are chances you might get stuck or your fluid. You're going to get lost circulation and you get issues with your well. And there are some cases where, from my own past, experience in deep offshore, they even try to build a shallow gas well, some meters, 500 meters away from where the primary well, spot target is supposed to be. Then by the time they drill the well and they're able to get the understanding of what the depth of penetration is in terms of the shallow gas and the mud width that was effective to manage whatever they see there, then they can move to the exact location. But as much as possible, also consider the wind direction when you're putting in your test well. You want to ensure that you're not going against the wind direction. So if, for instance, your wind is moving from north to south, you wouldn't go and put your test well in the north. You have to put your test well in the south. So that at the end of the day, if you drill your shallow gas well in the south and it turns out to give you problems, even if there's a gas issue or so, the wind will actually take you further south. But if you put it in the north and your initial plan was to be in the south, what happens is that you're going to, affect the primary location you actually want during your work. So some of these things are actually considered. It's something with the seismic. You also look at your seismic. If you look at some funny things, if you look at where my cursor is at the moment, you realize these are significant local, gases that could actually cause some major problems for you in the subsurface. So as much as possible, if you can avoid it, you avoid those localized gases. Then another thing to look out for is as a subsurface person, you're looking at the economic model. You want to build a simple economic model. We know we always do a detailed one, but based on geology, geophysics, what we do is to use a threshold, a volume threshold. For instance, if I have a volume of 5 million barrels, I might say, okay, my threshold is 4 million barrels. With 4 million, anywhere I see a recoverable of 4 million barrels, it's okay for me to put in a well there. But if my volume is not up to 1 million barrels, or if my volume is, let me say, 100,000 barrels, that well cannot pay, that volume can't pay for a well. So you wouldn't want to put a well there. Rather, you might want to say, okay, if my volume is 500,000 barrels, can I do an STOG activity? That's an intervention activity that is just requiring me to go and reperforate, and I'll be able to make that volume. And at the end of it, I might spend just $100,000 or 500 or 1 million, something significantly lesser than drilling a well. So as much as possible, if you're going to drill any additional well, ensure that you're going to make significant value in terms of the net present value. So when I do this simple calculation, it gives you an idea of, oh, what should I expect? You should expect that what? Your C minus B should be, C minus A should be greater than your B as much as possible. So where you have C minus A, C means develop with additional wells. If I'm going to drill additional wells, that opportunity volume, the money I'm going to make from it must be higher than the money I'm putting into drilling that well. As much as possible, it has to be higher than it. Otherwise, if it is not higher than it, then I have to go ahead and develop without additional wells. Then the other thing is to look at is the facility. You need to ensure at the possibility of even existing wells location. If an existing location, there's no need for me to go drill go prepare a new location because it's going to cost some money to actually prepare that location. So as much as possible, we want to keep that aside. And the other bit also is you have a nearby facility that you can actually tie your well to or tie your production to. Because if you don't have nearby facility, you need to plan for that. Otherwise, you get all your hydrocarbon resources to the surface and begin to look out for how do you get those to the nearby facility. So many times, as you're planning your development well, the facility guys are beginning their work once you finalize the development well and get it down to approval from the regulators and everything is sorted out, in the same process, you're preparing your locations for you to actually drill your well and lay your pipeline to the nearby facility. Then you also look at the FDP. Usually for you to drill a well, you need to ensure that the reservoirs are captured in the FDP. And in some cases, it might require you to do an FDP addendum. You go ahead and do that to effectively get your value. So in conclusion, I would say the management of fields, especially brown fields, old fields, which we have so many of them in the world today, they require a lot of integration of data, both the seismic, the model, static dynamic wells, reservoir properties, pressure, production history, performance, completions. All of these data will have to be integrated. And together with all the team, the geologists, geophysicists, petrophysicists, reservoir engineers, production tech, well intervention, well engineers, all of the entire team, you have to sit together and everyone will be providing value on how you can actually harness these resources. But the best approach in anything you do as a geology geophysicist is to see how you can always reuse existing wells and facilities before you even think about planning new wells. If the existing wells cannot harness them, then you go ahead and plan new wells to harness those opportunities. But even where new wells are planned, you need to ensure that the uncertainties are properly managed, or if there are also opportunities for other uncertainties around the field, you can use those new wells to also address those uncertainties. But in each case, this is more like the most important controlling factor. Economics has to be done in all of the analysis, in all of the opportunity you mature. Ensure that the economics, that the opportunity passes economics. If you know you're not going to make value, money from it, don't do it as an academic exercise. It costs a lot for you to actually carry out an intervention activities. It costs a lot for you to actually drill a new well. Do not go and drill a new well because you want to write research papers. Drill new wells because you want to get data and actually feed that data to improve your reservoir understanding, or you want to produce hydrocarbon, primarily to produce hydrocarbon. That should be the target. The others are secondary. So the primary target is to produce hydrocarbon and also get adequate reservoir management principles that would help to produce hydrocarbon for a very long time. Because, for instance, there's a way you manage your reservoir, then you choke it so high that the reservoir produces for a short while and dies off. So you also want to use the adequate reservoir management. That's why you have to do well tests to confirm which reservoir, choke size is actually effective to develop a well. So in terms of production geology generally, it's actually a very broad topic. You cannot exhaust everything in 1 hour or 2 hours. In fact, if you're going to do a production geology course, you can spend as much as 1 month or 2 months for you to actually understand the entire gamut of the different aspects of production geology. So what I've just done here is to present to us a high level of what the general understanding is, and also to show some case examples of what are the things to look out for whenever you're identifying opportunities where you could actually drill wells to produce more oil and gas resources within your fields. Thank you. So I don't know if there are questions, comments. Thank you.
That was a really brilliant and fantastic presentation. We can already see the virtual applauses in the chat. Please let's all give Dr. David a big clap, please. That was a very, very fantastic presentation. You explained all the concepts. They were all clear, gave a lot of examples and case studies to drive home your point. An excellent presentation. I encourage us all, even after we've all listened to this, obviously the live stream will still be available on the YouTube channel. So please try and go back and play that and get all the learnings. Obviously, we may have missed a few things while he was presenting. So I'll encourage you to go back and get as many learnings. So thank you so much, Dr. David, for that fantastic presentation. At this point, we will have to stop the live stream because the rest of the session and interactions would have solely been reserved for the participants, the bootcamp participants alone. So on that note, I would just like to say a big thank you to all of those who have joined on the live stream on YouTube. We hope you had a fantastic time and you learned a lot. I personally learned a lot, and those here on the call and the bootcamp learned also a lot as well. So we thank you for joining, and we hope to see you same time next week when we have the next technical session on petrophysics next week, Monday. So on that note, I will be ending the live stream while we continue with the rest of the session.